With us now, we have former MSNBC host Chris Matthews. His Substack is titled Hardball with Chris Matthews. Also with us, MSNBC political analyst, former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, and co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. Thank you all for starting us off this hour. Claire, we'll begin with you. Government shutdown hitting a month mark. It's going to feel particularly painful for millions of Americans starting tomorrow because of those SNAP benefits. Weigh in on this moment, and in particular, this urging in a late night, very lengthy Truth Social post from President Trump to blow up the filibuster.
Yeah, people always want the filibuster to go away when they are in power. And then they don't want it to go away when they're not in power. And the Democrats in the Senate remember the push on the left to do away with the filibuster just a few years ago. And now we are being protected to some extent, not to a great extent, but to some extent, by the filibuster from the worst instincts of the Trump administration. So I think the Republicans know that if they do away with it, there's a great chance that they will be on the receiving end of ramming things through the Senate, just like it happens in the House. You know, and the other thing about the shutdown, I think it's really important to remember, and Joe mentioned this earlier, I'll tell you what the Democrats have their eye on. People forget that unlike in Congress, Senate races are decided by independent voters. Those seats that are gettable in the Senate for the Democratic Party, there's only one way to get them, and that's through independent voters. There aren't enough Democrats in these states to carry the day. They have to have the majority of the independent voters. And on the shutdown, the Democrats are winning this battle with the independent voters, particularly on health care costs. And if they stay disciplined about that message, then if they do away with the filibuster, they better watch out, because the Democrats will control the Senate beginning in January of 2027.
So, Chris Matthews, pulling back the curtain here, you sat down at this table a few minutes ago before the camera flipped on and said you had thoughts about the threat to blow up the filibuster. Let's hear it.
It's unbelievable. I think it's another move toward monarchy. If the President of the United States is able to win his own party by taunting them with primary challenges, and he can do that, we've seen that, he runs the country. And by the way, why have a Senate? Claire, why do we have a United States Senate if it's going to be a bunch of people like the House, where it's all one-party rule? Most political parties, most congressional districts are one party. Big cities are Democrat, rural areas are Republican, and it's one party. If the president has control of his own party, he's the boss, and it's going to be official. And by the way, I think he is feeling the heat now. And I think that, as Ronald Reagan once said, I'll admit I'm responsible or irresponsible if you admit you're irresponsible, if you're running the place. And so he's been running the place. If you ask American people who's running America right now, they'd say Trump.
Yeah, and polls suggest that. That's why they're getting the blame. And we should remember that, of course, President Biden was urged to toss away the filibuster, even for something like voting rights, and he didn't.
Nope.
He believes in the institution. So, Lauren, let's talk about moving beyond the filibuster, just this moment in our political landscape. Poll after poll, we spent some time this morning on a new one. Indeed, Republicans and Trump getting the blame for the shutdown. And it's been interesting watching the shutdown sort of evolve really in slow motion, where for a couple of weeks, it didn't really break through. People weren't really seemingly upset about it or talking about it. That's changing. We're seeing what's happening with the air traffic controllers. We're seeing healthcare about to happen. And then tomorrow, SNAP benefits.
Yeah, it takes a minute for things like a big government shutdown to really start to affect everyday Americans. And I think the threat of the end of SNAP benefits is one that Americans take very personally. It is, no one wants to see their fellow Americans go hungry. We don't want to see those long lines. And you saw the response when there was footage of military, of uniformed military on bread lines, in communities around the country, because they weren't getting paid. There was an instant backlash to that. And of course, then the administration miraculously found a way to find money for the troops, although that's, pretty fuzzy. Look, the filibuster is a really amazing way for Trump to once again distract, the way he does so extraordinarily well, from that very issue. Everyone else in America is talking about, healthcare costs rising and food benefits. And now suddenly this morning, we're talking about the filibuster, which is important, but it's not really that important to most Americans. What's important to them is, are they going to get fed? Will there be flights on Thanksgiving? And are their neighbors going to be suffering? And I think that's becoming more real by the day.
Yeah, and it shows, that as the optics of this as all those real world things are happening. What's the president focusing on? Like the blowing up the East Wing and installing a golden ballroom there.
It's magical metaphors all around.
I mean, it's almost too on the nose. Speaking of how the administration deals with Congress and has made it so subservient, earlier in the show, Republican Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio told us about a classified briefing for lawmakers yesterday regarding the deadly boat strikes carried out by the Trump administration in the Caribbean without congressional approval. Here's what the Republican congressman had to say.
Everyone is very, very concerned, of course, about the drug trade and the impact in the United States, the deaths that have occurred, and impacting the flow of drugs into the United States. People are similarly very concerned about what the administration is doing with the deaths that are occurring, with the blowing up of the boats. Yesterday, there were not very good answers as to what is the standard, what is occurring with the designation of cartels as terrorist organizations. We understand that the structure of these cartels, and designating them as terrorist organizations makes sense. But what is the standard? What is occurring in this? How is it being determined as to how military force is being utilized and being applied in this situation?
Mr. Chairman, did you get the answers that you were looking for yesterday, Mr. Chairman?
No, and in fact, lawyers were supposed to be in the room. They were not. People were very frustrated in the information that was being provided. It was a bipartisan briefing, but people were not happy with the level of information that was provided and certainly the level of legal justification that was provided.
And we have bipartisan complaints on that because we also had earlier in the show Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, saying the same, Claire, that there simply wasn't enough provided here. The lawyers were asked out of the room. And then earlier this week, and I know you were on Armed Services, your time in the Senate, earlier in the week we had Democratic senators being irate that the administration offered briefings on Venezuela on these strikes and only invited Republicans.
Yeah, and by the way, the Republicans that participated in the briefings that excluded Democrats, shame on them. The shame keeps heaping on their backs for many reasons, but this is a big one. I mean, really, we are now at the point that we are going to be okay with the president murdering people without having to provide even the United States Senate any proof, any legal justification. Do we not require legal justification for murdering people on the high seas? I just think that, even if there is a legal justification, then why aren't we hearing it? Why isn't a lawyer explaining exactly how they have the right, willy-nilly, to kill people and then just move on to the next boat they're going to kill people in without ever explaining what the evidence was or the legal underpinnings of the entire operation? It is scary. It is un-American. It is absolutely killing our image around the world.
And if he gets rid of the filibuster, and not that he can do it himself, obviously, why would he invite any Republican to any meeting? Why bother? All you need is a majority of your own party. That's it. That's it. And that is the end of democracy, because if you can rule your caucus, and that's all he has to rule, he's in charge. This is pretty frightening. And why even have committees? Why have Democrats and Republicans on the committees? All you need is Republicans. They're calling the shots.
Yeah.
It is so fundamental. If you cut out debate, forget Mr. Smith goes to Washington, forget what we grew up believing in, that you can speak as long as you want in the United States Senate, that it's the cooling dish. You're talking about tea all morning. That's the cooling dish. That's where things are considered seriously and deliberately. I think Trump has figured out a way that he can run against the shutdown, that he can say, I want to get rid of the shutdown, I want to get rid of the filibuster, and I'm going to call John Thune on that, and we're going to change it. And it's clear that he's feeling the heat. Well,
Thune has voiced opposition to that in the past, but certainly just in recent days. But as Congress becomes more and more subservient to the administration, we now have the drums of war potentially striking with Venezuela. We should note the admiral in charge of Southern Command resigned after a heated meeting with Hegseth, in part because of what's going on there. Lauren, let's set that aside for a moment and speak about Election Day on the horizon on Tuesday, and in particular, two states with closely watched gubernatorial races, Virginia and New Jersey. And the shutdown playing a role in each, we believe. We're seeing some new polling here. Abigail Spanberger has opened up a 10-point lead in Virginia. She's been ahead throughout this race, but this is about as big as the margin as we've seen. And then in New Jersey, a race that has been really tighter than Democrats wanted until recent days. We're now seeing Congresswoman Sherrill also open up a little bit of a lead there. And there is a sense that shutdown politics are at play, directly impacting whether it's federal workers in Virginia or the cancellation of train tunnels from New York to New Jersey, that these voters are looking at Washington and saying, this administration, Republicans are hurting me.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you know, it's interesting. Virginia, I think, is a little different because Sears is just not a great candidate. I mean, she's really fumbled a lot of opportunities that she had politically. And, you know, I think Spanberger was well positioned. Her history in the military, which is like a huge part of, obviously, significant parts of the state of Virginia. And as you say, the, you know, Washington suburbs of Northern Virginia that are loaded with federal employees, you know, really throughout the state. It doesn't surprise me that she's ahead. New Jersey is a much tougher place. And as we've seen in the tri-state area, we saw this in the New York gubernatorial a couple of years ago, these races get closer when you have sort of reasonable Republicans running. New Jersey has been more divided over the years. They've also, you know, we've had Republican and Democratic governors there over the last decade. So I think it's going to be a tighter race. She's running her heart out and got a lot of national support to step up. And then, you know, New York City, I think, is getting super interesting. The demographics of who's turning out to vote in the city has really shifted from what it was this summer, which we've talked about. We're seeing older voters, my people, the Gen Xers, are turning out, and you know, more of the city, more of the 5 boroughs that weren't represented really in the summer. And by the way, one thing I should just say, Staten Island, which, you know, definitely runs to the right on most political issues, you know, one of the few Republican members of Congress in the state of New York, they really didn't turn out in the summer. We're seeing big numbers on Staten Island. So I think this race could wind up being way closer than Mondani would like. Still think he probably wins it, but I don't know.
Senator Ernie's really raised an interesting thing, which it could be crazy, but it's smart politically. He says, I'm a homegrown guy here. I grew up in Jersey. Unlike these guys before me. Unlike Corzine, unlike the other guy, the incumbent. And he basically saying, I'm a better person because I'm an incumbent. I grew up here. Now, she's got a fabulous background. She went to Annapolis. She went to London School of Economics, Georgetown Law School. She's done everything to prepare herself for public office. I think she'll win. But this guy's played this card of the home guy.
And there's been ups and downs in her campaign, but polls suggest that she has opened up a lead here for Tuesday. And in terms of the New York City mayor's race, you know, Mamdani has led throughout. There is a sense the race is tightening, but the last sense of public polls still had him up somewhat significantly. We shall see. Tuesday, Election Day. CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. Lauren, thank you. Great to see you. Coming up next.